This is not just another ghost story. It is the terrifying account of a foreign student who rented a small apartment in Prague only to discover that she was not living alone. Every night, a shadow appeared in her bedroom. Not a trick of the light, not a dream, but something darker, something that followed her even after she escaped. She thought leaving the apartment would end it. She was wrong. This is the story of Anna Muller and the shadow in room 17 that haunted her for the rest of her life. If this story chills you, don't forget to like, share, and comment. And stay with me for more terrifying tales every day. The cobblestone streets of Prague glistened under the dim light of the street lamps, the air thick with the scent of old stone and autumn rain. Anna Muller pulled her suitcase behind her, its small wheels rattling unevenly against the ancient pavement of Nerudova Street. She had always dreamed of studying in this city, a place where history clung to every wall, where the past whispered in every corner. But tonight, under the looming silhouette of Prague Castle above, those whispers seemed heavier. Darker, Dumper 17 stood out from the other buildings, not because of its beauty, but because of its neglect. The facade was cracked, the plaster crumbling, in thin flakes that revealed older, darker stone beneath. The paint on the shutters had long since peeled away, leaving the wood bare and grey. Yet, despite its worn exterior, something about it felt watchful, as if the house itself was waiting for her. Anna rang the brass bell by the door. It took several moments before she heard slow, deliberate footsteps echoing from inside. The door creaked open, revealing Mrs. Novak, the landlady. She was a tall, thin woman in her late 60s, her hair pulled back into a tight bun, her face lined and pale. Her dark eyes studied Anna with an intensity that made the young student instinctively clutch her. Suitcase closer. You are the German student, Mrs. Novak said in a voice that was both firm and weary. Yes, Anna replied in Czech with a slight accent. Anna Muller, I'm here for the room. The old woman nodded, stepping aside to let her in. The hallway smelled of dust and mildew, the faded wallpaper curling at the edges. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting the walls in a yellowish glow. Mrs. Novak led her up the creaking staircase to the second floor. The building felt hollow, each step echoing as if the stairwell was swallowing the sound. Finally, they stopped in front of a heavy wooden door with the number 17 carved into the frame. This is your apartment, Mrs. Novak said, pushing the door open with surprising strength. The room inside was small but adequate, a narrow bed. Pressed against the far wall, a desk by the window overlooking the sloping street, and a tall wardrobe whose mirror gleamed dully in the half-light. The furniture was old but well kept, though everything carried the faint smell of age. Anna set her suitcase down, trying to hide her nervousness. She had lived in student housing before, even older than this, but the atmosphere here pressed down on her like an unseen weight as she began to thank the landlady. Mrs. Novak raised a finger, her expression grave. There are rules, she said softly, almost whispering. Rules you must follow in this house. Anna froze, caught off guard by the sudden change in tone. If you see the shadow, Mrs. Novak continued, her eyes narrowing, don't meet its eyes. And never open the bedroom door after midnight. For a moment, the only sound was the wind rattling the shutters. Anna forced a small, nervous laugh. The shadow, she asked, trying to brush it off as local superstition. Mrs. Novak didn't smile. I mean what I say. This house is old, older than you think. Do not take my words lightly. Before Anna could reply, the woman turned sharply and left the room, closing the door behind her. The sound of her footsteps receded down the stairs. Leaving Anna alone in the silence, she sat on the edge of the bed, exhaling slowly. It was probably just a way of scaring tenants into behaving, she told herself. Old people and their stories. Still, the warning clung to her thoughts like cobwebs. By the time she unpacked and arranged her books on the desk, it was nearly midnight. Exhausted from her journey, she switched off the lamp and crawled under the blankets. The room was colder than she expected, the kind of cold that seemed to seep from the very walls. She drifted into sleep quickly, but it didn't last long. At precisely 3 in the morning, Anna's eyes snapped open. A chill swept over her, raising goosebumps on her arms. The silence in the room was suffocating. Her gaze moved slowly across the dim outlines of the furniture, the desk, the wardrobe, the chair in the corner, and then she saw it. A tall, dark figure stood in the far corner of the bedroom, motionless. Its outline was human, but no details could be made out. Just a mass of darkness, darker than the shadows around it. Anna froze, her breath caught in her throat. The words of Mrs. Novak echoed in her mind. If you see the shadow, don't meet its eyes. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She tried to convince herself it was a trick of the light, a coat hanging from the chair, her imagination fueled by exhaustion. But she could feel it. It wasn't just a shadow. It was present, watching, summoning every ounce of courage. Anna reached for the lamp on her bedside table and flicked it on. The bulb glowed, flooding the room with pale yellow light. The corner was empty. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as she scanned the room again, but the figure was gone. Only the familiar outlines of her furniture remained. Anna sat upright in bed until the morning light began to seep through the shutters, sleep never returning. By the time the sun rose over Prague, she tried to tell herself she had imagined it. Just nerves, nothing more, but deep down, in the pit of her stomach, Anna knew the shadow had been real, and she knew it wasn't finished with her. The next day passed in a haze of lectures and introductions. Anna tried to focus on her classes at Charles University, but her mind kept drifting back to the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the figure again, tall, unmoving, silently watching her from the corner. By evening, she convinced herself it had only been exhaustion, a trick of sleeplessness. She had traveled, moved into a strange apartment, and listened to the unsettling warnings of an old widow. Her nerves were bound to play tricks on her. Still, when she returned to Nerudova 17, she kept the lights on while she made tea and sat at her desk to read. The golden glow from the desk lamp softened the shadows, made them less threatening. She avoided looking into the far corners of the room. The wardrobe stood tall by the wall, its mirror catching the lamplight. The glass was old and slightly warped, the surface cloudy with age. Whenever she walked past, Anna saw herself distorted, her reflection bending at strange angles. She tried not to look at it too often. That night, around 2 in the morning, she awoke with the sharp, uneasy feeling that she was not alone. Her throat felt dry, her body tense, as if something had dragged her out of sleep. Her eyes flicked instinctively to the corner, where she had seen the shadow before. Empty. She almost sighed with relief until her gaze slid toward the wardrobe. In the mirror, she saw herself lying on the bed, wide-eyed, just as she was. But behind her reflection, standing directly over her shoulder, was the same tall figure. Anna's breath caught in her chest. Slowly, as if moving in syrup, she turned her head to glance over her shoulder. Nothing. The room behind her was empty, eyes darted back to the mirror. The shadow was still there, its form looming over her reflection, closer now than before, heart pounding. She pulled the blanket up to her chin, forcing her gaze away. She squeezed her eyes shut and whispered to herself in German, "It's not real, it's not real, it's not real." But the next morning, she found the wardrobe door slightly ajar, though she was certain she had closed it. The following nights brought no rest. The figure returned again and again, always in the mirror, always nearer. Sometimes it hovered at the edge of the bed, its shape indistinct but massive. Other times it stood just behind her shoulder, its formless head tilted as if studying her. Once she swore she felt a breath against her neck, hot and damp, even though the air in the room was cold. Anna grew pale, her eyes ringed with dark circles. During the day, she struggled to concentrate on lectures, her hands trembling whenever she lifted her pen. Friends and classmates noticed, asking if she was sick. She brushed them off with excuses, bad sleep, too much work. But inside, fear gnawed at her constantly. On the fourth night, she decided she had to know for sure. She set up her laptop on the desk, adjusting the webcam so that it faced the bed. The small red light glowed in the dark, recording everything. She lay down, pulling the blankets over herself, though her body refused to relax. Sleep, when it came, was shallow and broken. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the bedroom door creaked open. The laptop recorded it clearly, the old wooden door, which Anna had locked before bed, slowly swinging inward. From the hallway beyond, a darker shadow oozed into the room. It moved without sound, without weight, as though the air itself had thickened into a human shape. The figure crossed the floor, step by step, until it stood right beside the bed. Anna stirred, twisting under the blanket, her breath quickening, though she did not fully wake. The shadow bent lower, its head hovering inches above her face. Its edges writhed like smoke, but its presence was suffocatingly solid. The recording captured everything, yet when morning came, Anna had no memory of the intrusion. She only remembered waking with a feeling of dread so heavy it clung to her skin. It wasn't until that evening, when she opened her laptop to check the video, that she saw the truth. Her stomach lurched as she watched the dark figure glide into the room, stand by her bed, lean down until its faceless head nearly touched hers. She slammed the laptop shut, heart racing so violently she thought she might faint. Whatever it was no dream. The shadow was real, and it was growing bolder. Anna stopped sleeping properly after that. She left the lights on every night, but the figure always came. She tried playing music, burning candles, even leaving the television running, but nothing stopped it. Each morning she found herself weaker, more fragile. Her hands trembled when she tried to lift her coffee cup. Her thoughts scattered, unable to focus. She dreaded the night with a kind of desperation she had never felt before. Sometimes she caught herself staring into the wardrobe mirror for long minutes, unable to look away. Once, she thought she saw the shadow raise a hand in the reflection, as if waving. Her body tensed so hard she thought she would break. Anna stopped telling herself it was imagination. The evidence was there on her laptop, but evidence meant nothing when she was the one trapped inside that room. Anna could no longer ignore what was happening in room 17. Each night drained her further, each shadow encounter leaving her body weaker and her mind frayed. The reflection in the wardrobe mirror haunted her even during the day. Sometimes, while brushing her hair, she thought she saw its vague outline just beyond her shoulder, waiting. She needed answers. One grey afternoon after another sleepless night, she walked through the winding streets of Prague toward the city library. The Gothic arches and ancient wooden doors seemed to breathe history, and inside, the silence was almost sacred. Dust floated like ghostly motes in the filtered sunlight. Anna searched through the local archives, requesting old property records for Nerudova Street. The librarian gave her a skeptical look, but eventually brought her a box of brittle papers bound with string. The documents smelled of age. Some were written in Czech, others in German. Slowly, painfully, she deciphered them. Her heart sank as she uncovered fragments of the building's history. During the Second World War, the house at Nerudova 17 had not been a normal residence. It had been requisitioned by the Gestapo. Her hands trembled as she turned the fragile pages. Reports mentioned Verhome interrogation rooms, whispers of disappearances, testimonies from locals who heard screams behind shuttered windows. There were references to prisoners brought in but never released. Names that ended with notes like missing or unaccounted for. The records abruptly stopped in 1945, when the Nazi occupation ended, but the pattern was clear. Anna felt a coldness seep into her bones. Her bedroom, her desk, her bed, all of it stood on ground once used for torment. The walls had soaked in cries of pain. The stones had drunk blood. She read on, horrified. One passage described an underground chamber in the basement, sealed after the war, unfit for habitation, the note read. The words swirled in her mind. Sealed, hidden, forgotten, ... As she left the library, the evening sky pressed down on her, low and grey. Nerudova Street seemed narrower, darker than before. That night, Anna sat at her desk, staring at the mirror of the wardrobe. Her own pale reflection stared back, eyes sunken, lips dry. She whispered to herself in German, "It's not a ghost. It's the memory of cruelty." Her words made her shiver. Suddenly, a knock echoed from the wall. 3 dull thuds, as though someone struck the plaster from inside. She leapt up, pressing her hand against the cold surface. Nothing moved, yet the sound vibrated in her bones. The next morning, while fumbling with her mailbox downstairs, Anna met an old man who lived on the ground floor. He was stooped with age, his face leathery, his eyes watery but sharp. He wore a thick wool coat, though the weather was mild. "You are in number 17, he asked, his voice cracked but direct. Anna nodded. The old man's lips tightened. He looked as though he wanted to say nothing, but then sighed. "I lived here as a boy," he began quietly, glancing toward the stairwell as if afraid of being overheard. "During the war, soldiers took the house. People went in. They didn't come out." Anna swallowed. "What happened to them?" The man shook his head. "They died. Screams all night. The walls remember." Her chest tightened. "The shadow, have you seen it?" The old man's eyes clouded, but he didn't look surprised. He leaned closer, whispering, "The shadow is not a ghost. It's the memory of cruelty itself. Once it chooses you, it follows. You can't run. You can't pray it away. It clings." Anna's throat went dry. "Then what am I supposed to do?" The man's expression hardened. "Leave, if you can, before it takes more than your sleep." He turned abruptly and shuffled down the hallway, leaving her trembling in silence. That night, Anna tried to leave. She packed her suitcase hastily, throwing clothes and books inside. But as she reached for the door handle, a sudden pain shot through her wrist, sharp and hot. She gasped, dropping her bag. On her skin bloomed a dark mark, almost like a bruise in the shape of a chain clasp. Her breath quickened. She tried the door again, but the lock jammed, immovable. Panic surged. She banged on the wood, shouting for help, but no one came. Finally, she slumped against the door, sobbing. When she looked up, the wardrobe mirror caught her eye. In its reflection, she saw herself collapsed on the floor, tears streaming. And behind her, the shadow leaned over, its faceless head turned down as if savoring her despair. The next days blurred together. Anna stopped eating properly. She barely left the room except for classes, dragging herself through lectures like a ghost. Her professors noticed her decline. One of them asked if she needed medical help. She muttered something about insomnia, but the truth was darker. Each night, the shadow came closer. It no longer lingered only in mirrors. Sometimes she heard it breathing beside her bed. Sometimes she woke with her blanket pulled taut against her chest, as though something pressed down. She could still hear the old man's words, "Once it chooses you, it follows." And Anna knew now, with a clarity that made her blood run cold, she had been chosen. The nights in room 17 grew longer, heavier, more suffocating. Sleep was no longer rest, but a descent into something darker, where Anna could no longer separate dream from reality. It began with whispers. One night, as she lay in bed with her laptop, still glowing faintly on the desk, she woke to a sound like breath brushing against her ear. At first, she thought it was the wind pushing through the cracks of the old windows. But then the whispers sharpened, coalescing into words. They weren't Czech, and they weren't German as she knew it. They were older, harsh, guttural syllables that scraped at her mind, yet carried meaning she somehow understood. "You don't belong here. This house remembers you. Stay." She pressed her hands over her ears, but the whispers curled inside her skull, impossible to block. The following morning, her throat ached. When she looked into the bathroom mirror, she saw faint red marks on her neck, like bruises in the shape of fingers. Her hands shook as she touched them. She hadn't dreamed it. Something had held her. Days blurred into one another. Anna tried again to leave the apartment, but each time something stopped her. Once she slipped on the staircase, tumbling hard onto the stone steps, her ankles swelling for hours. Another time, the tram she boarded broke down inexplicably, stranding her only a few blocks away from Nerudova Street. It was as if an unseen tether pulled her back to the building. Dragging her to room 17, she grew afraid, not just of the nights, but of the days too. Hallways stretched longer than they should. Shadows clung to her even under sunlight. The city she had admired felt hostile now, its beauty twisted by paranoia. The dreams became worse. One night she dreamed she was bound to a chair, her wrists and ankles locked by rusted chains. The air was damp, the floor beneath her feet sticky. A single bare bulb swung overhead, illuminating stains on the walls brown, dark, and dripping as though still wet. Voices echoed around her, cries of pain in Czech, German, Russian. Men begging, women screaming, children sobbing. She couldn't see them, but the room pulsed with their terror. In front of her stood the shadow, taller than ever, its form writhing like smoke yet solid in its presence. It leaned closer, faceless, but she could feel its gaze pressing into her skull. She tried to scream, but her mouth was gagged. The shadow raised an arm, and the iron chain around her wrists tightened, biting into her skin until she felt warm blood. When she awoke, her wrists burned. She stumbled to the bathroom, turning on the light with trembling fingers. There, on her skin, were fresh bruises, rings of purple and red circling her wrists like shackles by the end of the week. Anna no longer doubted that room 17 had claimed her. She sat at her desk, staring blankly at her open books, but she couldn't read. Every time her eyes shifted, she caught movement in the mirror shapes sliding just out of focus. The wardrobe's reflection seemed to mock her, showing fragments of the shadow even when the room itself appeared empty. Her classmates noticed her decline. One, a kind girl named Clara, offered to walk her home after class. "You don't look well," she said softly. "Maybe you should see a doctor." But Anna only smiled weakly, clutching her bag. How could she explain that no doctor could treat what was happening? No medicine could protect her from a house that had soaked in decades of cruelty. The next night broke her. She drifted into another dream, but this time she was fully aware, conscious, inside the nightmare. Unable to wake, the chair, the chains, the screams, it all returned, clearer than before. The air smelled of iron and rot. The walls bled with streaks of red, the shadows deepening until they swallowed the ceiling. She thrashed against the chains, wrists burning. "Let me go," she screamed, though her voice felt muffled, swallowed by the room. The shadow leaned close again, and for the first time she heard it speak, not in whispers, but in a guttural growl that filled the air like thunder. "You belong here." Its faceless head hovered inches from hers. She felt its cold breath against her cheek, smelled something rancid, decay, mold, centuries of damp stone. The chains tightened again, and agony shot up her arms. Her vision blurred, spots of black spreading across her sight. Suddenly, the bulb above flickered violently, flashing images on the wall, hands pressed against stone, nails tearing as people clawed to escape, faces twisted in pain, boots stomping across puddles of blood. She saw a man in a Gestapo uniform leaning over a prisoner, shouting, striking, leaving him limp and broken. The images came faster and faster until Anna's scream was drowned out by the chorus of the dead. And then she woke, gasping, drenched in sweat. The bruises on her wrists were darker now, almost black dot. Anna stood before the wardrobe mirror the next morning, staring at her reflection. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. She barely recognized herself, but it was not her reflection that terrified her. Behind her, in the mirror's surface, the shadow loomed taller, sharper, its form more defined than ever before. She could almost see the outline of a mouth stretching where its face should have been, a grin that wasn't there in the room itself. Anna staggered back, clutching her arms. She wanted to scream, to flee, to burn the entire apartment to the ground. But the old man's words echoed in her skull, inescapable, once. "It chooses you, it follows." Anna understood now. There was no escape, and room 17 wasn't finished with her. Anna could feel it building toward something. Each night, the shadow had drawn closer. Each dream had cut deeper. Each mark on her body had grown darker. Now, every time she entered room 17, she felt the walls contract, the air press in, as if the apartment itself anticipated the end. She decided she needed proof. If no one would believe her, if the shadow was truly real and not the disintegration of her mind, then she would capture it. She borrowed 2 cameras from a fellow student, pretending she was working on a documentary project. That evening, as the sun set over Prague Castle and the street outside her window fell into silence, she placed the devices around the room. One pointed directly at the bed, another angled toward the wardrobe mirror. Her laptop faced the doorway. She tested each until the small red lights blinked steadily in the dark dot, as midnight crept closer. Anna sat on the bed, hugging her knees. She whispered the words Mrs. Novak had told her weeks ago. If you see the shadow, don't meet its eyes. And never open the bedroom door after midnight. Her chest tightened. She hadn't opened the door at night, but the shadow had found its way in all the same. When the clock struck 12, silence descended on the room like a shroud. Even the noises of the city, the late footsteps on the cobblestones, the distant hum of a tram faded into nothing. Anna lay down, pulling the blanket over her. Every nerve in her body was raw, her ears straining for the first sound. It came at 3 a.m. sharp. The wardrobe mirror quivered, the glass vibrating as though a soundless blow struck it. Then the air grew heavy, cold enough to fog her breath. From the corner, the shadow bled into the room. Not walking, not gliding, spilling, like ink poured into water, filling every space until its shape solidified above her. Anna's breath caught. In her chest, she could feel its weight pressing the air from her lungs. The cameras whirred, their tiny lenses capturing everything. The shadow leaned closer. Its form was no longer formless. A distorted face rippled in the darkness, features shifting hollow sockets for eyes. A mouth torn into a grotesque half-smile, its jaw trembling as if trying to form words. Anna turned her head, fighting to avoid its gaze, but the shadow pressed harder. She felt her chest crushed beneath invisible hands, the weight suffocating. Her throat tightened, her lips parting in a silent gasp. Don't look at its eyes. Don't look at its eyes. Her vision swam, spots of white bursting in her sight. She thrashed weakly, trying to push it away, but her arms were pinned by nothing she could see. The shadow bent closer still until its hollow sockets hovered inches from hers. The air filled with a guttural sound, low and resonant, a vibration that shook her bones. Her body convulsed. She tried to scream, but only a strangled wheeze escaped. Her fingernails dug into the sheets, clawing for release, and then dash blackness. When light touched her eyes again, it wasn't the pale glow of dawn, but the sterile white of fluorescent bulbs. Voices murmured around her. The faint beeping of a monitor pulsed in her ears. Anna turned her head weakly and saw a nurse adjusting an IV line, her expression tight with concern. "You're safe," the nurse said softly. "You had trouble breathing, but you're safe now." Anna blinked, her throat sore, every muscle aching. Her memory flickered in fragments. The shadow above her, the crushing weight, the suffocation. No, she wasn't safe. She knew that later that day, a doctor entered her room, his voice calm but clinical. "You experienced acute respiratory failure, most likely from severe sleep paralysis combined with stress. You're very fortunate your neighbors called for help when they heard you collapse. Neighbors, they must have broken into her room." But the explanation meant nothing. Anna knew the truth. Sleep paralysis didn't leave bruises shaped like shackles on her wrists. Stress didn't record shadows on a camera. When she was discharged 2 days later, she returned to the apartment only briefly. She couldn't bring herself to stay. Instead, she gathered her belongings quickly, her body trembling, her eyes darting to every dark corner. On the desk, her laptop still sat open. She hesitated before touching it. Part of her wanted to leave it behind, to abandon every reminder of room 17. But another part of her, the rational student, the historian needed to see, needed to know. She opened the files. The footage was clear. She watched herself lying in bed, eyes closed, chest rising and falling. At first, nothing moved. Then, at exactly 3:02 a.m., The bedroom door opened on its own. The shadow entered, spilling across the floor, climbing the walls until it loomed directly above her. Anna's hands shook violently as she watched the black shape bend over her sleeping body, pressing down on her chest, its faceless head hovering inches from hers. One of the cameras captured its distorted face in detail, the stretched features, the hollow eyes, the jaw unhinging as if screaming silently into her. Her own body went limp on the screen, chest convulsing, eyes rolling back, and then the video ended. Anna slammed the laptop shut, her heart hammering. The proof was undeniable. The shadow was real, but proof did nothing to keep her safe. She left Prague soon after, boarding a train back to Germany, her suitcase heavier with fear than belongings. As the city receded behind her, she vowed never to return to Nerudova Street. Yet, even as the train rolled past the countryside, Anna felt it, the same heavy gaze, the same invisible weight pressing against her back. She tried to convince herself it was only paranoia, but in the depth of her mind, she knew the shadow was not bound to room 17. It was bound to her.
Thank you for following.